The following program is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. You can request podcast topics, enjoy exclusive RPG and video content, and more. Even just $1 a month gets you gameplay episodes a week early and makes you officially cool. Just like our Trash Elite, a guy from Ohio, and Rob, Greg Starstorm, Kitty Holbrook, Destrucity KTL, DG, Passion Killer 711, and Thomas Alston Jr. It is I, Eric J. Chucky, joined as always by the boy.
Hello.
And this is the Two Nerds Podcast. I am a tabletop role-playing game designer. I've done 2 systems in my life. One took me like 25 years. The other one took me 2. And, you know, you get better with time.
Yep.
And we were talking last night with a friend of ours and talking about a sci-fi RPG. And I could use a new project. But this conversation is so fresh that I thought it might be interesting to show off the early stages of what it's like to kind of get the rough concept of a tabletop role-playing game. I did a couple of streams like this when I was working on stuff, and people found it pretty interesting. So we figured we'd give it a shot. Why not? It's something to talk about. And we don't talk about RPGs as much on this channel because we don't play mainstream RPGs anymore. So, yeah, that's the long and short of it. Anything to add before we talk about what's crumping?
No, I think you covered it.
Okie doke. Well, what's been crumping with you since I've been talking so much?
I've been playing more Elden Ring, Night Rain. Been doing the stuff I normally do. Other than that, I haven't really experienced anything new media property-wise since the last time we talked in crump form, I believe.
Do you think this has any impact on why we're talking about a random topic today instead of, media?
Unrelated, probably.
Okay.
Coincidence.
Well, it's kind of funny, actually. I've been playing Night Rain. I actually beat it, as one can. And last night I started playing the Mega Man X series again. I was never as into it as I was the classic. It's different.
One would hope.
Yeah. The dash button being on a face button. There was a quote on Geekenders, I believe this past weekend, mentioning better stuff on our stuff, but it is what it is. I think it was Dodger that said a problem with older games is that sometimes, even when they were really good at the time, quality of life changes have gotten you so far in a better direction that it's really hard to go back. And I think that was my problem with Oblivion, a series which is, unless you guys really demand it, over. But like Mega Man X, the dash being on a face button, when I'm already holding 2 other face buttons to jump and shoot, that's insane.
Yeah, that should definitely be on like a shoulder button.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of them are these days. But like when I was a kid, it was fine. I remember it not being a problem.
Well, so, you are older now, and your older hands are not as nimble as tiny child hands.
Sure, but they are larger.
That's fair.
Anyway, that's what's been crumping. It's been a crump light week for me. But I am excited to dig into this project. So this was a saved document. I was writing an essay. So let me just get rid of that. Okay. So we talked about a couple of settings, a couple of like lore concepts, and I'm fine if we talk about lore stuff today. I think that's rife for potential in creating a setting. I'm not necessarily saying this is what I'm going to go with when it's finalized. Also, if you are interested in the RPGs I've made, Wizards and Whites is a fantasy RPG using a D12. Giallo-Punk is a more point-buy, modern, supernatural, urban fantasy game. Also uses a D12, but it is slightly different. Both of them are on the Patreon. I believe a $10 tier. And you can download PDF copies of them. That's available there for you. Wizards and Whites is still being updated actively. Giallo-Punk is pretty much done, pending some play testing. But so if you're curious about that, that's where that is. This might be there in the future in some incarnation or another. I don't know if we're going to go with everything we talk about today, but this is the concepting part.
This is the blank page stage, the blue sky stage, the anything is possible. What do we want this to be?
Right.
Rough outline.
So we had conversations about like lore and maybe basic mechanics and theories. The 3 of us had separately. And last night I sat down after everybody went home and started to try to do this myself, and I ran into an immediate hurdle. Sci-fi classes do not have to be different from fantasy classes in theory. Wizards and Whites functions off of 3 classes, of which there are many archetypes, subclasses, spawned off from, and that is the warrior, the expert, and the wizard. The warrior is a lot of hit points. They get many attacks, but the attacks only do a moderate amount of damage, and they get like all the armor and weapons and stuff. The expert usually does 1 and at later levels 2 attacks, but they do a ton of damage in the right circumstances. And if you are careful or very dedicated, those right circumstances are all the time. They have less hit points and get less weapon and armor. And then wizards are very resource focused, get no weapons and armor, and they have very low hit points, but they can tell the fabric of the universe to sit down and shut up.
Which is a fair trade.
So like one could translate that almost directly to a sci-fi setting. You know, your warrior would use a gun instead of
That's basically just soldier, technician, and psyker.
Yeah. And that's... I don't feel like that evokes the game. That's refitting. It's not building. You know what I mean? Like, you can use 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to play a sci-fi game. We did.
You could use Wizards and Whites to play a sci-fi game. All of the stuff is universal enough. You mentioned that you think there would be some trouble retrofitting stuff. I think there'd be less than you think. I would be comfortable DMing a sci-fi game using out-of-the-box Wizards and Whites personally, but if we're building something fit for purpose, something specifically designed to highlight the strengths of that setting as opposed to fantasy, there are some changes you could make that would be helpful.
Sure. And the classes is where I first sat down and went, how do I make this feel unique? You know, sci-fi is so big. There are so many different kinds of sci-fi. And with fantasy, while the genre can shift, you've really got high fantasy and low fantasy.
And with sci-fi, you have a couple different of the same macro settings. You have, basically, it's a much more sliding scale.
Sure.
Between soft and hard.
There is more of a sliding scale, yeah.
Basically, I think the first decision you have to make when making a sci-fi setting is where you want on the Mohs sci-fi hardness scale, where do you want your setting?
And I'm thinking, based on the conversations we had, based on the people who ostensibly will be playing this most often, it's going to be a softer sci-fi because it was expressed that through whatever reasonable means, whether they be tech or shut up, don't think about it, or the Force equivalent, magic was desired by all parties discussing. Some method of violating the laws of physics reliably. Right.
Because the hardest sci-fi does its best not to violate any laws of physics. And that sci-fi is, in a word, not great for tabletop RPGs.
It depends on the type of game you play. We as gamers...
That was many words. I did it on purpose, by the way.
He does that so often I didn't even blink. We as tabletop gamers like some crunch. We're not Pathfinder players, but we're not playing, race cars and raccoons either.
Well, so the thing about it is, sci-fi has a couple different tropes in it that I think as a tabletop RPG you want to meet. And most of them aren't possible with extremely hard sci-fi.
Sure. Most of your hard sci-fi is going to be either really gritty stuff that I think Cyberpunk, the actual role-playing game, handles just fine, or it's going to be Star Trek-esque, not in the adventure episode sense, but the more classic diplomatic sense, the Daggerheart sense, if you will, where this is less about Captain Kirk punching out a lizard man and more about Captain Picard talking Q out of annihilating everything because it's Tuesday and he's bored. So yeah, our tabletop group, the way we feel about gaming, you want the opportunity, if not the focus, to be on the pulp, the action, the excitement, the thrills.
So, we want it to be We want it to have some sort of magic equivalent. We want it to be relatively soft, but I don't think too soft. I don't want to go full Star Wars.
No, I think it's more fun if there's an in-universe explanation for the magic. Whether that's like Slay Industries, where you're doing incredibly complex mathematical equations that people figured out can do magic powers. Or I had an idea way back in the day of like a Grey Goo event where there's a bunch of nanomachines. They are no longer malicious, and people basically quick hack them to create magical effects, etc., etc. I would like there to be some...
So then there's a choice in front of us. Do we have... A lot of sci-fi is based on either sort of one big lie, one big divergence. Mass Effect is a great example of that. All of the sci-fi goofy bullshit in Mass Effect derives from Mass Effect, from Element Zero. Or do we have like more of a sci-fi kitchen sink type where there are possibly many different ways you could violate the laws of physics, and each maybe alien culture has developed their own unique one? That's much more of a Star Trek sort of thing.
Yeah, and it can be pretty granular. I would like to do something that's... I think it would be useful. This is something I approached Wizards and Whites with. Magic in general, but also a lot of the things in the setting specifically, are obfuscated to some degree. Explanations are given. Hints are offered. But one of the things I loved about older editions of D&D, and even to a certain extent 5th edition, less on 4th, is that you were allowed to... encouraged to take the rules they gave you and kind of contort it to your own fluff without too much difficulty.
For me, I like that in fantasy. In sci-fi, an understanding of an exploration of the specific mechanics by which the one big lie operates, if not functions, like at least it's... physical operation and the limits thereof is part of what makes sci-fi different than space fantasy.
So you're suggesting that this to qualify as sci-fi even more, that the source of magic should be almost painstakingly defined.
It's an option. So, as an example, Mass Effect. I'm going to use it because it's a good example of the sort of one big...
Mass Effect has a really great source of specifically magic, too.
It's magic. The Mass Effect, biotics, it is magic. It's magic powers. We all know that. Functionally, it's magic. But there are in-universe explanations for how all that shit works.
Right.
Now, they're pretty high level. They're not very granular, but they do exist. How does Element Zero make you go faster than light? Well, here's how. How does Element Zero give you telekinesis powers? Well, here's how. I think it's beneficial for sci-fi to have answers for those questions, even if they are pretty high level. Mystery, arcane, the system for violating the laws of physics, whatever it is, being arcane is much more of a fantasy thing than a sci-fi thing.
Okay, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down here. So I think we could find a way to make that, and let me clarify what I was saying, broadly applicable to a bunch of genres of sci-fi. Because I feel like the differences between various subgenres of fantasy is not as hard between the two, hard and soft, as the differences between cyberpunk and a space opera. And,
I would agree.
Yeah, and I would love if whatever we come up with was applicable to any of those kinds of settings. I would love it if someone, whether that's us or a future Patreon person or somebody buying a finished product, I'd have to hire a lot of artists that I don't have money for, but was able to take that and go, I want to run this week, Star Trek Federation style exploration and diplomacy, and that is possible through this system. And then the next campaign they run is a gritty cyberpunk fight against, technocracy kind of thing.
So we're going to want to keep things fairly general then.
General, but I think you can take a specific anchor, an anchor of specificity. I think the word order there is important. And just so long as it is made sure that that can be altered or is agnostic to some of the other trappings of how society functions and stuff, I think that's possible. You wouldn't want to do the secret to magic is literally human suffering. If you want it to be able to do things for more hopeful science fiction, you know.
I think that's fair. Generality is, something we want to know right in front, because that'll help us sort of determine what we want to do next, right?
Bam. Text on the screen. You gotta love it.
All right. So we're about halfway through the amount of time we had to fill, and we have essentially nothing about this setting.
It's beautiful.
So I'd like to try and get something concrete down.
I'm listening.
Let's start with, very simply, what do we call it? Obviously, we can't call it magic. What is the name we want to use for how you violate the laws of physics? We can use that to ideate from there as to what that name means, but it should be, I think, technobabbly is important. Not overly long, so that you can use it in sentences, and evocative.
Okay. So I would suggest, and I think you would agree with me, that we don't want it to be some sort of exclusively inborn ability.
No, I think it definitely should be for me personally, a resource.
Yes.
Something that can be acquired. Perhaps it's very difficult to acquire. It might just be like, Dune, the sci-fi chemical, the dust, only exists on one planet. So
I like the cluck there. Thank you.
It could be very easy to acquire. Mm-hmm. Element zero is everywhere.
Yeah.
But if we're going with the one big overarching cause method, a good example of the other method is Star Wars, where hyperspace is very vaguely defined, and a bunch of different races have a bunch of different ways of doing it. Shut up.
Well, and does hyperspace travel necessarily need to be defined by the magic?
Yes, because that's not possible in conventional physics.
I feel like there could be two things, but I understand where you're coming from here.
So what do we... I think it should be a resource. So are we talking like pure resource extraction? Is it oil, as a great metaphor? Mm-hmm. Are we talking about second order resources? Is it technology? Or are we talking about third order resources? Is it unobtainium?
I think unobtainium makes it a little too exclusive, but I don't think we want it to be everywhere either. So I think you would want it to be... Well, okay. Do we want there to be a price for doing magic?
There should be an investment. One, I think it provides good mechanical challenge. And two, I think it provides good narrative challenge, a good way of gating large actions. If using the hyperdrive costs something, then in a higher tier, in a more developed campaign where you're playing Star Trek, you have to take that into account when trying to get to the planet that you're trying to save on time.
Well, and as an aside here, from a mechanical standpoint, I have found that when you're doing astrogation, hyperdrive travel, etc., you want that to be a party thing.
Yes.
So if one person or more in the party is putting their magic juice into the hyperdrive to make it go, it leaves space for other people.
That's, even if that is just the thing that's running the hyperdrive and everyone in the party has to contribute in some way to make it work. Mm-hmm. I agree with that, but I think that's a party dynamics thing. I think that's well below the area we're operating in right
at present, certainly. I just want to make sure we don't define our way out of that.
Yeah. And in a lower focus campaign, if fuel costs money, well, the Serenity's stuck in space this episode. And we're just sort of floating because we ran out of gas. And I think that allows for that breadth of possibility you wanted in terms of types of campaigns it can support.
So let's maybe look at something akin to Mass Effect, something that fosters the ability for a cyberpunky setting. What if the resource, whatever it is, we'll define that some other time, maybe today, but what if that is manipulated in people through the installation of some kind of device.
Yeah, we want second order. We decided it's not oil. We don't want it to be unobtainium. We want it to be technology of some type.
Okay. Cyberware implant manipulates magic resource. Resource is not oil, is not unobtainium.
So then if it's technology, that implies some things about the setting.
Sure.
That, again, still provide that breadth of applicability, but...
Well, and I say this as well because I'm a mechanics guy. This is, y'all might wonder what the hell my talent is. It's doing crunch. I have always been incredibly good at this naturally, and I love it, so I'm very good at it.
That's why I mostly leave the crunch to him.
So I say this because while, especially Wizards and Whites, is not a game that's designed for PvP, the monsters function on different rules from the players. I do want a sense of balance of one player type should not overshadow the other player type.
That's just good for table dynamics.
Yes, I agree. So when we say that there is some sort of investment, like an implant, in order to cultivate your magic...
I feel like, one, I do want to nail down before we stop what it's called.
Okay.
And two, every player character should have one of those. That's part of what makes you a player character. You have the equivalent of a cyber deck. You have the thing that gives you the ability to go above and beyond the average person. That's why we're following you. That's why the story is following you.
Okay, so basically what ends up creating the different, let's call them classes for now, is how you utilize that resource. It's basically a game where everyone is a wizard. It just depends on, are you a punch wizard? Are you a gun wizard?
Yeah, it's a cultivation novel.
Okay.
Are you a body cultivator? Do you punch things? Do you use your essence to make blades of wind? Everything. He's got this fucking faraway look in his eyes that he always gets anytime I mention he's not intimately familiar with. It's very funny.
No, it's that you're mentioning something I am intimately familiar with, and I still don't understand it after writing a novel in the genre.
You not write a novel in that genre.
Well,
trust me.
Yeah, I did not.
But it is, everyone has this ability. The player character, what makes them a player character is your X. Is getting the X, the technological widget, the MacGuffin. And then what you do with it, whether you use it to enhance your physical combat abilities, whether you use it to give yourself supernatural aim, whether or not you use it to give yourself more time to think in combat and thus be better able to plan or use explosives or whatever we decide to go with in terms of the actual mechanical combat moment to moment, that's what makes you a player character. That should probably be one of the first couple things you select. Is like, here's your blah, what do you do with it? That's the class. Right.
I'm for this. This is a little different from what I would usually do, but honestly, it might work out for the better because it allows for even characters who are intended to feel like I'm just a soldier to have amazing things they can do.
Yes, and things that are above and beyond, Soldier 76 in Overwatch is just a soldier. He also has nanoparticle healing.
Right.
And a space future gun. And those things could easily run off his whatever it's called.
Okay. I am looking for an amusing pun.
I have one.
Okay. I want to hear yours.
It's a pun based off a term you use.
Okay.
But I don't know if it's applicable here.
Okay. I'm listening.
Quantum computing chassis. A QPC.
We're not naming the essential MacGuffin in this game after a quarter pounder with cheese.
It popped into my head, so I had to share.
Right. I was thinking whatever... And I'm leaning chemical now, or perhaps an element of some kind that can manipulate your very chemical makeup. The acronym being RPG. The joke here being that this is based on cultivation fiction, lit RPGs, that sort of thing. You are building yourself.
Also, it's a tabletop RPG.
And it is, yeah.
I love that.
So something, permutation gauge. Ribo blah-de-de-blah, rhizo blah-de-de-blah.
Give me a second. Let's see here. What I think RPG is good. Let's see here.
He's Googling. Did I spell gauge right? Of course not. One of my least favorite words to try and spell. Gauge. Gauge. I'll talk for a minute. So this actually opens up the problem I was having was class stuff. It basically becomes a lot more like the Elder Scrolls magical definition. And I'm not saying one can't cross over, that makes it less fun. I don't know that I want to do a point buy thing exclusively. I've already done point buy to death. And levels allow for a certain amount of freedom. There's a lot of players that, kind of balk in the face of point buy. It's very intimidating to get into. What I have with Wizards and Whites is there's a basic level system, and then every now and then you get traits, which let you customize what your character gets on level up. That's a lot more familiar to people who are especially video gamers, where that happens. Your hit points go up, your attack bonus goes up, and then you can pick your special thing for the level. I've found that's a lot more palatable for your general audience than a pure point buy. So you came up with something?
I've got a couple options that might be fun.
All right.
So this is the you know how the Hulk originally just got nuked and then it eventually became something else and eventually became something else?
Yeah.
Or Spider-Man, the reason his spider bite gave him superpowers keeps having to update.
Right.
Because science keeps moving forward.
Yes.
It's basically how far along that treadmill do we want to put the setting? How Z-Rust do we want to be? Because at the very basic, there's just radiation. And
that gives us a flavor because radiation invites the negative consequences of radiation as part of the overall setting. You maybe have to fight mutants. You maybe have to deal with people who have been turned into mutants and are still trying to survive. That's not a bad thing. It does just color things.
Yeah, and you can give it a nice sci-fi explanation of like, we figured out how to manipulate the background, the cosmic background radiation of the universe to make changes to dark matter, blah, 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 blah.
Cosmic radiation is a very Marvel bullshit.
Cosmic radiation. The one of the moment is quantum because we don't fully understand that. Well, the public doesn't know what the fuck that means yet. But if we use something that's before that, it's going to give it a sort of old school vibe.
Okay.
Are we happy with that?
It's an option. I'll list it here under the options.
Another one that I found that's pretty good is recombinant.
Recombinant. Why don't you define that for the listener?
Yes, because you obviously already know what that means.
Of course. It means to combine something again.
Yeah. It's it's a genetics term.
Okay.
So it's the step after radiation.
Okay.
Spider-Man's bite was a radioactive spider, and then suddenly it was a genetics experiment. And in the future, it will be a quantum spider. I'm just going to break that to you now, listener, viewer. 20 years from now, it's a quantum spider. I'm telling you that's going to happen.
Peter swinging away with horror one day. The spider that bit me, is it dead or alive? How could we know?
And so that's the next one. This is a genetics term.
Okay.
I'm going to grab the actual Google definition. Something that has been created by combining genetic material from different sources.
Okay. All right. I don't hate that. Maybe one of the genetic materials, maybe it is a little bit like oil in that it occurs naturally, or like Final Fantasy VII's Mako. It's the lifeblood of living planets. That have since died, or maybe there's some ethical concerns about taking this lifeblood, whatever. And you're basically using this implant to splice it with your own genetics and thus manipulate them on the fly. That's kind of interesting. I kind of like that. What else do you have?
A couple that I don't like as much. You could just go with like a mathematics term.
Okay.
Something simple like root.
Root.
A root permutation gauge is just...
I don't actually hate that. It's really simple.
It's really... This one is beyond the quantum treadmill. This one is... makes it purely techno-wizardry. It is... This little machine uses math to break physics.
Okay.
It is doing, to use an old term, it's use of math to be a dick. It's what the mathematician does in Wizards and Whites.
Right.
It's just does very complex computations and spits out, I have proven to you that this ship is now in this part of the galaxy instead of this one. And then, because you can prove that mathematically, it just works. This one is quantum by another name.
All right, well, I think these are 3 really good candidates. I think it's about what we want the fluff of this setting to, what its tint, because you do have to have one conceit, like you said, what that's going to be. Do we want radiation that's more of a Z-Rust? We have more mutants. It's more pulpy. The implant itself is a little questionable in its safety. So you have a lot of that ironic Outer Worlds style. Everything is fine here. Isn't capitalism dandy? We have recombinant, where are we the baddies? Or is this just like we're using dead dinosaur bones from weird dead planets kind of thing, where you are opt-in mutants from the Marvel universe? Or do we want Root, where it is a glorious technological manifestation of quantum computing?
And that might be harder to obtain, because obviously, you would want... All of these would be difficult to get.
Yes.
For different reasons.
Because the common folks still have to exist.
Yeah. So if it's a radiation permutation gauge, then the issue is that...
They fucking die.
Yeah, you are running on a half-life. So...
And even some people can't take it. Can't take the implant in the first place.
So, that gives a player character a tense, a form of tension, because that means you have to find some way to to extend your life, to extend your tolerance to radiation. A recombinant, because that gives it the second order. The gauge is what second order the recombinant material. I like recombinant material as like a term of art there. Is like the oil that this engine runs on. Yes. Right? So that gives it's a material that's hard to acquire, and you could run out. And then if your gauge is empty, then you don't have any recombinant material. Oh, guess what? Your powers are off till you get more. And then Root, it could just literally be very hard to manufacture.
Could be like a time-based thing that the tiny computer inside you needs to do its thing.
It is actually quite hard to use math to break the universe. So these are hard to get a hold of, and even when you get a hold of them, they take time. So it would be it all provide ways of it still being hard to obtain, but not impossible, which is what we wanted to hit.
Okay, well, I will say, let's just do some ranked choice here. I think my favorite is the recombinant. I think my second favorite is the Root. I'm a little less interested in the radiation, not from the standpoint of what it is, but of what it ends up doing to the setting. I'm a little over that specific kind of ironic retro future.
Okay, that's my least favorite also, so we can just scratch that off the list.
I'm glad we're in agreement. So get out of here, radiation. Nobody likes you.
And then I prefer the Root one, just because it's more pure sci-fi for me, and further away from like a Dune sort of situation.
Sure.
But provided this material is available on multiple planets, we're going to be far enough from there anyway. But I'm pretty happy with both. I feel like it's about which one would you rather be. I think Root bakes in less into the setting by nature. Recombinant bakes in more setting detail.
It does. It does make it unique. Now, and that's another thing as well we didn't at the time, but it's not like Wizards and Whites is GURPS. Wizards and Whites has its own details, its own lore. Several of the archetypes are pretty unique to what that setting is. You can kind of change them a bit, but you can fit them to multiple ideas, is what I meant to say. So there's nothing wrong with standing out among the crowd.
Yeah, I don't think we should I don't want to try and make GURPS. No. GURPS did a fine job.
GURPS still exists. It's still there. So here's a question I have for you. ¿Por qué no las dos? You wouldn't necessarily need to make them an evil faction or something, but what if there is a group of people out there who have figured out the obviously superior root permutation gauge. And it just runs a little differently. In Wizards and Whites, when you make a wizard specifically, wizards are very complicated to make. You can choose so many options for where your spells come from and whether you use mana or spell sockets or that's insistent terminology, or you kind of roll to see if you maintain control of your magic. Perhaps this would be a choice like that. We started with the recombinant material. And then there is a society who does it better. And that is just an option you have for your character. It defines some of the things about your character, defines how and when you get your juice back, versus someone who doesn't have that. Spitballing that out there as an idea.
My brain is also trying to find a way to combine both ideas into one thing.
Perhaps the material is manipulated by the hypercomputer?
Yeah, basically.
I don't hate that.
Like, in that way, it could be just like an RPG, a recombinant permutation gauge or root permutation gauge could just be a difference in terminology between different factions.
Yeah, I don't hate that.
And my brain really wants me to find 2 science terms that start with T, so it can be a TTRPG. But I think that's too long.
Yeah, I mean, plus once we, clearly spin this off into a successful video game, they'd want to change it. And let's not have to do that.
No.
Okay, I like that idea. So then all we need to do for what we wanted to accomplish before the end of this podcast is, what is the magic called? What does your RPG do?
Yes, and I think... I think giving us a name for the thing, for the widget, is a really good starting point for that.
Yes, that's why I went that direction.
So from there, it's just a matter of is there a specific term for what the gauge does, or do you use the gauge to do sci-fi shit?
Well, they would call it something in universe.
Well, yeah, but there's absolutely no reason why we couldn't use this. Are you using the RPG to do bleh to make you go faster than light, or are you using the RPG to go faster than light? Is there a middle term?
I think so. I think for the sake of...
If we want there to be a middle term, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we did.
As a brief aside into what your classes or subclasses, whatever they end up being, are called, permutation matrix.
Yeah. I
like that a lot. I'm going to write that down. So yeah, we just need to know what your permutation gauge does. What do people call that?
So are we trying to come up with a bespoke term, or are we going with standard sci-fi lingo stuff and making it a brain rot version of the inherent term?
I'm open to either. I want to hear what options you have. I'm kind of empty-headed at the moment.
The brain rot alternative is perms. Because it's one.
I'm from the 80s, so that's.
It's a pun on permissions in computing, you're getting mod permissions.
Okay.
And 2, it's permutations.
Right.
So and it's a good way of explaining what you can do.
Well, and I think in a lot of settings, I mean, even wow, that formatting on that just went crazy. There's going to be a lot of terms for your perms. Because it's not just magic, it's not just arcana, there's wizardry and sorcery, and it all means the same thing.
Yeah. But saying so what can you do? I've got hyperdrive perms, I've got, just trying to think of cool sci-fi shit.
Yeah, the super speed perms. I've got elemental manipulation.
I think it's a fun computing joke because it sounds like you have mod permissions in the server.
I don't hate that. I think there would be other slang. I think there might be a really clunky official term that nobody fucking uses.
Absolutely, and derivatives from this. So permit, license, the equivalent of Cockney rhyming slang.
Sure. Even people who are saying references within a references. I've got my papers to do this.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I think we've come up with what we wanted to, and I think there's a lot of fertile ground to create from here on out. Anything you'd like to close this podcast out by saying?
I look forward to seeing where this ends up.
Space.
Ooh.